Jade couldn't be sure how long she sat in the stall waiting, but she was sure it had been at least an hour. If the man in the box was as important as he seemed, then surely the backup would have come and gone quickly. On shaky, half-asleep legs, she stood and dusted her skirt before quietly making her way to the bathroom door. Placing an ear against it, she listens for a moment before slowly pushing it open. The lab was now shrouded in darkness, and any sign the crate or the men had been there is gone. Her bag and coat still sit on the lab table by the door. Quickly and quietly she tiptoes to the table to collect her belongings. After taking a deep breath, she slowly cracks open the lab door and peers into the dark hallway. It's just as still and silent as her lab. She debates momentarily about spending the night. The thought of someone coming and to look around and possibly question her, however, made her choice clear. No point in waiting around tonight. The government agency that owned this lab would surely interrogate her if they knew she was here during anything that just transpired. Jade slid into the darkened hallway and quickly made her way to the back exit. The silence should have been welcoming after the earlier commotion, but it only made her feel watched and nervous. She realized she'd held her breath as she slinked her way out of the building, inhaling deeply only once she was safely outside. Her eyes scanned the empty parking lot for any sign of life, her feet finally agreeing to move when she confirmed the coast was clear. Jade broke into a sprint as she crossed the empty field, running into the dense tree line, dodging between trees that concealed the lab from the city. Jade fell to her knees when she felt asphalt under her feet again. Gasping for air, she scanned the area around her, still feeling as though she was being watched. After several minutes and plenty of deep breaths, she stood, giving one final glance behind her, before continuing on her way home. With each step, her adrenaline slowly drained, and Jade found herself feeling tired and a bit sluggish, the drag of the day's work finally catching up with her. Working in a government lab that deals with things most people think are made up could be a tedious and draining task. Jade, however, found it to be interesting and fun, at least most of the time. With a heavy sigh, she collapses onto a bus bench near her home. Her arms looked as though she'd been mauled by a rabid cat. Despite the warm weather, she'd have to wear long sleeves for a while to avoid questioning glances at work. Not that she really cared one way or the other. No one in the office spoke to her casually anyway, but the whispers were bad enough as it was. The last thing she needed was to overhear conversations of worry that she was now cutting herself on top of being socially awkward and lonely. With a sigh, Jade looks to the sky and prepares to walk the last few blocks home. The sooner the better, since her body was now begging for sleep. No sooner than she'd stood up did she get the strange feeling of being hunted. Suddenly thoughts of those two men flood back, and she feels her body grow cold from nerves. She stops walking, holding tightly to her bag as she spins to glance all around her. Meekly, she calls to the empty street.
Hello.
Only silence answers back. She takes a deep breath and tries to still her beating heart. She repeats in her mind, "There is no one there. There is no one there," as she continues towards home. Suddenly, 4 men are surrounding her, shouting at her and shoving her to the ground. Her purse is ripped from her grasp as one of the men hold her to the pavement. Jade closes her eyes, feeling tears squeeze their way out and down her face. She pleads with the men not to hurt her, feeling hands tug her hair and over her arms and legs. The men laugh and mock her pleads for help.
"Shut up. No one is coming for you, bitch."
One of the men spit in her face. She can't smell the stench of liquor as she struggles against hands that are now trying to rip her clothes from her body. She screams to no avail, fearing she may have escaped at work only to walk right into a deadly path now. All at once, the hands stop and Jade's eyes fly open. The men are standing around her, facing off with another man who just so happened to be out for a walk at this time of night. Jade scoots backwards, trying to put distance between her and the thugs, but one of them looks over his shoulder at her and says,
"If you fucking move 1 more inch, I'll kill you."
Jade freezes in terror, and the man smiles coldly, lust flashing in his drunken eyes. The stranger approaches closer, however. Jade cannot tell, through her tear-filled eyes, if he was coming to help her or join in with the thugs. His features became a bit clearer as he neared them. He had shaggy black hair and wore an indifferent expression. His crimson eyes, however, seemed to glow with fiery rage. In that moment, Jade had not considered how strange it was to see a person with glowing red eyes, nor did the four thugs seem to take notice. The thugs looked as though they were ready to fight the man, each warning the stranger to keep walking and mind his own business, and for a moment, Jade feared he would just keep walking. With wide eyes and a tear-stained face, she mouthed the words, "Help me," to the stranger, and for just a split second, it seemed as if he had smiled at her. The stranger rotated his shoulders back, cracking his spine as he did, and tossed his head right and left a few times, popping his neck. He shakes his arms, preparing to fight, as he takes a few steps towards Jade, completely ignoring the men who now close in around him. The stranger's eyes never leave Jade even as the first mugger throws a fist towards him. The crimson-eyed man dodges, flicking his half-smoked cigarette into the thug's face. The thug spins away from the strange man, clenching at his burned eyes, where the cigarette had made purchase on his skin. The stranger roundhouse kicks two of the other thugs in the temple, knocking them unconscious, almost instantly. Before they even thud to the ground, the stranger rushes the fourth, delivering a loud cracking fist square in the nose, and he falls to the ground before shoulder-checking the first mugger, still recovering from the cigarette burn, so hard he's knocked unconscious. The crimson-eyed man steps over the bodies, approaching Jade, who stares in awe. Jade watches the scene unfold with stunned silence. As each thug hits the ground, she eyes them wearily before suddenly she is face to face with the crimson-eyed stranger. Her breath catches in her throat, and for a moment, she is left without words or understanding. It had all happened so fast, after a very long and awkward silence. She finally manages to thank the man, but his features remain still and indifferent. He stands and steps away from Jade, giving her room to stand and dust herself off with shaking hands. A soft gasp escapes Jade's lips as she takes a closer look at the thugs. They all appeared to have inexplicable fresh-burn wounds. The stranger clears his throat, forcing her attention to snap back to him. Questions escape her lips before she has time to think.
Who are you? Are you from the lab? Are they from the lab? What did you do to them? Did you burn them? Are they dead?
The stranger tilts his head curiously, but holds his hand out to stop her questions. She quickly covers her mouth with a hand to stop the words from spilling out. The man looks at the thug sprawled on the sidewalk, and his shoulders sink. He seemed uninterested and annoyed now. Maybe he didn't like people either. Jade had just been at the wrong place at the wrong time, so he stepped in. But now what? She let her eyes fall to the ground, unsure of what was supposed to happen next. The stranger approaches her, lowering so he was on his knees in order to peer up into Jade's eyes. She freezes. Nothing about this was normal. Even if she wasn't exactly an expert in normal human behavior, she knew this entire situation was odd. Jade swallows the lump in her throat, searching her mind for the correct response when the man finally speaks.
The name's Arman. I didn't kill them, though they would deserve it.
His eyes glance over to the thugs with an uncaring gaze.
I don't think it's necessary to explain their burnt bodies, nor do I know what lab you're referring to. However...
Arman looks back at Jade. His voice was cold and hollow, and it struck fear in her.
I think you may owe me a favor or two now.
He watches her carefully, as if trying to figure something out. Before Jade could come up with a response, he's already on his feet again. Jade's eyes follow him up. He's well over a foot taller than she is, and suddenly, her entire body is stiff with fear. If he wanted something from her and she couldn't give it to him, he'd have no problem taking it. Jade knew all men only ever wanted one thing, and there was no way she would be able to fight him off if he decided to take that from her. Arman studies her face, watching her eyes grow with fear, and raises an eyebrow curiously.
Since you seem to lack common courtesy, let me help you. When one introduces themselves, it's only polite to do so back, is it not?
Jade swallows and nods slowly, still unsure what exactly was going on.
My name is Jade.
She quietly whispers her own introduction, as she raises a trembling hand to shake with Arman. His nose scrunches as he looks at her shaking hand, as though she was last week's leftover fish. After a brief moment, Jade lets her arm fall back to her side. Had she been wrong to assume it was normal to shake hands upon introducing yourself?
Thank you. I don't know how to repay you.
Jade tells him solemnly. Curiosity on Amon's face seemed to fade away after a moment, and he turns from Jade with a loud huff.
You're all the same. Ungrateful, fragile mortals.
He says more to himself than to her. She studies the man, wondering if she was hallucinating from exhaustion. He couldn't actually have glowing red eyes, could he? He was fairly tall, with dark shaggy hair, and although she couldn't quite tell from the black suit he was wearing, she was certain he must be quite muscular by the way he had handled those thugs. He didn't seem like he enjoyed playing the role of a hero, and Jade found herself feeling burdensome to him. But those eyes, those glowing red eyes were something strange. They seemed as though they had red embers floating in them, burning with the emotions Amon seemed to lack. Jade shook away her thoughts as an idea came to mind of how she could repay him.
How about I treat you to dinner, as a thank you?
Jade offers. Amon sighs, shrugging at her offer, but when his eyes fall back to her, the curious expression had returned.
I suppose I could do for a quick bite.
He tells her, and suddenly Jade felt a little foolish. What was she doing inviting a stranger to dinner, like it was some kind of casual date? However, her mouth was already saying words before her brain could catch up.
Okay, do you have any preference?
Amon only shrugs again as he looks at Jade from head to toe.
You don't exactly look as though you have the riches to satisfy my appetite.
Amon gazes somewhere up in the horizon and sighs.
However, I find myself a bit out of sorts with nowhere to go at the moment. So whatever you can manage will do.
He looks back to her, disappointment clear on his face. Jade groans internally. All she wanted to do was go home and climb into bed. It was well past midnight now, and she would have an early and very long day tomorrow, especially if anyone came to question her over the man she'd released tonight. She rubs her temples, feeling a headache creeping in on her. She hadn't considered the time before offering the man dinner. What was wrong with her tonight? She couldn't possibly buy him dinner now, if all the shops are closed. Just as she looks back to him to explain this revelation, more words fall from her lips without her brain's permission.
Well, this is a little...
Jade eyes the man warily, weighing her words.
Unconventional, and normally I wouldn't even consider it, but given the time and circumstance, I'm afraid the only way I can offer you a meal is to invite you back to my place.
Amon raises a brow again, slightly more entertained with that idea.
Don't misunderstand the offer, though. It's just the only option, and I am not offering you anything more than dinner.
She stares at Amon with determination, trying not to show any sign of nerves.
I suppose that is acceptable.
Amon says, slowly nodding his head in approval. Although all she could think about was sleeping, she knew she had to do something for this man who had saved her. If cooking him a quick meal could put an end to this terrible night, then the sooner the better. Finally feeling a little more at ease, Jade points down the road.
My place is that way, if you don't mind.
Jade looks one last time to the thugs, who are starting to stir.
I'd really like to get moving. I'm exhausted and I don't want to stick around long enough for them to get back up.
A cold smile spreads across Amon's face as he gestures for her to lead the way.
You say that as though you believe me incapable of handling that situation.
Jade feels a chill race down her spine as she heads for home. Just who the hell is this man?